to freetalklive.com. We got more on.
All right, I'm back with Titus Gebel, going over the best book that I have read this year, Free Private Cities by Titus Gebel, and you can get it at Amazon.com. Titus, we're talking about the idea of a free private city, and we're not just talking about this in an imaginary sense. There are people that are working on this around the world. There's different organizations that are trying this. Roger Ver has proposed that at some point they're going to work on it. Patry Freeman, the grandchild of Milton Freeman, has talked about this and worked on a project. There are other organizations out there that are working on this, and I sincerely hope that within the next decade we have something like this tried. How would you propose to set this up, Titus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is maybe a new approach compared to what we have as libertarian ideas in the past, like this Minerva project and other things. I concede that all the territories in the world are distributed, so I have to find a host nation who is willing to make a deal with me. And the deal is a kind of a Hong Kong, right? It's a one country, two systems model. And we are offering governments a kind of a special economic zone next level. We say?
Right. So special economic zones exist, right? I'm sorry. I just wanted to say special economic zones exist. They're all over the world. They're not even something new. When was the first special economic zone made? In the 70s?
60s, I think.
Right. They're older than I am.
There were only a handful in the 60s, 70s, and now there are over 4,000 special economic zones, and there are two of them which have an own legal system within a different legal system. So it's already in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So it's already going into another direction. It's easier to sell this to the governments because they know special economic zones. If you say free private city, they don't know what I mean, and they may be frightened. But if I say, look, what we are offering you is a special administrative zone. It's a kind of a special economic zone plus. And that means it's not only about taxes and customs, it's about everything regulated on our own. We have our own security forces, own courts, own legal system, own system of living together. But what we do acknowledge is your sovereignty for foreign policy and for defense. And
so
normally I'm already negotiating with governments. Normally they will ask me, okay, but we have conducted some international agreements, treaties about labor's rights and anti-human trafficking and anti-money laundering. That we have to concede that we also following those, right? So this is the concession you have to make to reality. Ideally, a free private city would be completely sovereign, but that is not possible at the moment. But
it's never been possible, Titus. That's the thing is that people that want some geopolitical designation that somehow just exists outside of. I mean, if you had your own city on an asteroid, you'd still have to deal with Earth. I mean, so Monaco, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Hong Kong, Singapore. These nations have to deal with the larger, less free nations that are sitting right on their doorstep, and they have to negotiate. Throughout history, one of the ways that that's been done is like, hey, look, people are using our roads to come to your town. We think we get a certain amount of money. No problem. Here's a check. We have a much bigger army than you do, and other nations won't attack you because they have to come through us. We think you should give us some money. And then the micronation does that. And sovereignty is a phantom. It never has existed, so you have to pay to some extent for keeping your neighbors happy.
Yeah, that's a very prudent observation. I mean, in today's world, there may be three countries which can claim that they're really sovereign, which is the US, Russia, and China. And all the rest are more or less not really independent, right? So and so far, everybody has to make concessions. And you rightly pointed to Monaco. They have done a good deal of negotiating a really basically good contract with France. They were blocked in the 60s, where de Gaulle, the French president at that time, said, well, we don't want that all our rich people are moving to Monaco. Basically, Monaco is a protectorate and you have to pay taxes. Everybody in Monaco now should pay taxes to France. Right? And eventually they negotiated, despite being such a weak country militarily compared to France,
Titus,
they found a compromise.
Titus, I'm losing you here. I'm losing.
Okay, look,
hold on, Titus, I'm losing you.
People who are from France, right?
Titus?
Hello.
Hi, sorry, I lost you. It was
Yes.
you were talking about the relationship between Monaco and France, and you were saying that France wanted to get all of Monaco citizens to pay taxes to France.
Yeah, all residents paying taxes to France, and they even blocked the border in 62.
1962?
1962.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there was a kind of a negotiation, and Monaco managed to get through that by making the following concession. They said, okay, here's the thing. Everybody who is coming from France, who is a French national, has still to pay taxes to France, despite living in Monaco. But for the Monegasque citizens and everybody else that is coming to Monaco from the rest of the world, that does not apply. So they are tax-free or only taxed by Monaco. And that was okay for France because they just wanted to prevent that the rich people from France just escaped to Monaco.
Right.
And then they would lose all their big taxpayers. They would still have everything in France, but would as a person would be outside of the French taxation. So and that works until today, right? That worked since the 60s, and that's the name of the game. And so that's a good sign, right? There is a possibility to have more freedom, to negotiate more freedom for yourself, even as a very small nation.
Right. So we currently have we have special economic zones, 4,000 of them. Those people have laid the groundwork. The negotiations have been put in place, and now you just have to negotiate with some place with the intention of creating more freedom for the citizens within a free private city. Now, free private cities exist to some extent already. We call them cruise ships and vacation resorts. So cruise ship is basically its own city out on the water. All it does is has to follow maritime law, which is a sliver of law compared to national laws, wherever one might dock or whatever. And a resort is basically a place that runs on its own, is left alone in many cases by the host country. They produce their own water and electricity and things like that. They've got to pay property taxes. Usually those property taxes aren't bad, but like I said, there's never been a sovereign state anyway. And so, I mean, all the groundwork is laid for this. It's really just a matter of finding some places that would be doing this. Do you have any ideas or any organizations that are working their way towards this, Titus?
Yes, of course. I mean, as you mentioned, there are a couple of groups working on that, and I am involved in a group that is active in Latin America. There are other projects where I have been approached by people who have contact to their respective governments. But as a rule of thumb, you can say it's not industrialized Western stable countries. It's more smaller countries that have issues with attracting investments.
Sure.
So they and getting jobs. So or have some problems. So they are more open to try out something new. And that is my offer. It's a win-win situation, right? We would say we want to start in a completely unpopulated area because, again, it's about voluntarism, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to force somebody in our system. So everybody has to come on a voluntary basis. But then if you have create something, or if you do create something in a formerly uninhabited area, and a lot of jobs are created and a lot of investment is made, then also you have a lot of people commuting in and out. They are taxpayers in the host nation. Then the companies in the host nation have more demand and can make more buildings and whatever. And you attract more investment for the whole region. So, and on top of that, you can say, okay, for your army and for your willingness to grant us this right, we are paying you 10% of our income or whatever. You get a 10% share of our private company who's running the free private city, and that is the offer. And at the end of the day, this is a deal. Right? If the government or the host nation thinks it can gain something out of that, it can become a Hong Kong, which was before nothing. And it's a win for them and it's a win for us. And that's how the world works. And if we can make use of that, we have a chance. We have a chance to negotiate more freedom than is currently thinkable.
Yeah, the free private city model just has gotten me really thinking, because it's a deviation from what people might consider libertarianism to be. A free private city doesn't have to be libertarian, but it fits the model if it's voluntary. So a voluntarist says, hey, whatever you want to do, as long as y'all consent, whatever, right? I don't care. Yeah. Have your city full of, dominatrixes and a bunch of guys on leashes. I don't care. But a libertarian city could be like, you could make your free private city to be libertarian, and maybe some of those things will work and some of them wouldn't work, right? Like, obviously you have to tell people, look, you got to drive on this side of the road if you're going to have roads, or whatever. There have to be rules. No libertarian's going to say, no, we're not going to have rules. But one thing that I thought was very interesting about this is that I got to thinking, and, there's the cost of acquisition. There's transaction costs in moving. So if I wanted to pick up and move to a free private city, one of the things I'd have to think about is I got to sell this house. And that means the real estate agent's going to take about 7%. And then, which of course is, if I'm hiring somebody to sell something, I got to pay them something. But then the government's going to charge me stamp fees and doc fees and all kinds of transaction fees, thousands of dollars in some cases, just to stop living in this domicile and move to another domicile. And a free private city, you could potentially rent there, hopefully with the sort of lease that one can get out of relatively quickly or whatever. And that affords someone significantly more freedom. I mean, we're told in America that home ownership is the end all and be all of freedom, and I'm not entirely sure it is.
Yeah, I mean, that is a valid point. The transaction costs is often what prevents competition, right? Or the effect of competition is prevented by that. What we try to do is to make the transaction cost as low as possible, and I hope that in the future it will be much easier, so that you probably, what we are currently seeing is a lot of membership models, a lot of things where you can easily transport your stuff within, maybe in the future with drones, right? And maybe you have your own unit where you live in, and you can transport this unit from A to B. So it's you're taking your house with you, so to speak. And that is then would make it much easier with much lower transaction costs to move. But what we are offering people is all kinds of, that's at least the plan for our first project, all kinds of models. You can either buy traditional, your land, build your house there. You can also go into a community where they have tiny houses, very, very, for $30,000 you can buy a small house and a property, and you can live there. Or if this is even too much for you, you can rent. Or you can become a member in a kind of a club where you pay something, you're entitled to live a certain period of the year there. So there will be all kinds of models which hopefully will then also be offered by private parties. But we are trying to attract such developers who are offering different models, and there's a lot of interest in the libertarian world, and there are a lot of people who have ideas how they want to do it, and this is all possible. And so I'm relatively feeling comfortable that we will be able to offer something that you can relatively easily move to the free private city without a big extra cost.
So it sounds like you're a little ways down the road on this free private city thing. Can you tell us anything like a timeline when you think maybe you'll have groundbreaking, or people might be able to begin looking to move in? Obviously, at some point or another, you're going to need people to slap down some cash and move in to this free private city. By the way, before you go on and answer that particular question, I like to think of these free private cities in that they already exist. They're like a resort in which you live. Now, not a resort in the sense that there's a wave pool or a place to go sunning. There probably will be, but a resort in the sense that they are their own self-contained little fiefdom to some extent. So do you have a timeline for this?
Yeah, look, we are really advanced in one project, which is not a fully free private city. I would rather describe it as a public-private partnership, but it's coming with this contract model, which is already much, much more than everybody else has in the world, that you don't have a constitution that can be changed and interpreted, but you have a contract. Where you say, okay, I'm a party to that contract, and it's only me and the administration. And this is so far advanced that I would say in the next 2 months, probably we have finalized the negotiation with the host nation. The reason why I'm not announcing where it is and what it is that before we are really not finished with our legal framework, it's all still open, and it's endangered also by internal opposition. So what I'm trying to do is really to get everything fixed with the government, and only if this has happened, I'm going to announce, okay, now we can really call this a new project, and we invite you to come, put some money down to reserve your right for your lot or whatever you want. And I'm happy to tell you and your listeners, Mark, when this will be the case. I personally think early 2019 will be the time to announce it, and which is not so long.
That's pretty exciting.
We can talk again.
That's very exciting. And I have to ask, right? I'm a talk show host. Can you give me? So you've said Latin America. Does that mean Caribbean, Latin America? I understand you don't want to give the name of the nation, but I got to ask. What can you get me closer?
No, my lips are sealed.
Okay, good. So let me ask you some of the harder questions. What happens if you pick the war-torn drug cartel disputed nation that's in Latin America, whatever it might be, and there's some kind of the government says, hey, we thought this was a good idea, but now we've changed our minds. You're now all citizens of our banana republic, and you will do as we say.
Yeah,
so they break the contract.
Justified question. One of the biggest issues we have, but here it is of advantage that most countries in the world have signed such bilateral investor protection agreements, and this is also the case with our country. And so we can say, look, it happens that they have a bilateral investment agreement with the United States. So we founded a U.S. company and say, look, if you are changing what you have promised to us, what you have signed, then it's expropriation, and then you have to pay damages because that's in the international agreement you signed.
Right.
And you also signed the New York Convention, which means that you are accepting the judgments of these arbitrational tribunals that are foreseen in the investor protection agreements. That would mean, in the end, we would then really have the right to seize property of this country, like the people did with Argentina when they were not paying their bonds. They just seized the planes and ships of Argentina, and then suddenly they paid. And that is basically our best protection, that we say we are going to invest. We are going to invest on the basis of the contract or the agreements we have. If you're withdrawing the agreements, then you have to pay damages, a lot of damages.
Right.
So that is one of the, in the real world, one of the things, because then no investors will come for the foreseeable future because they all know this story.
Right. Basically, there's been 4,000 of these special economic zones. Any country that decides that it wants to break these agreements will basically have to deal with an international court, and that international court will likely say that now the free private city is in fact a free private city. This would be the very best thing for the citizens of this and the investors in this free private city if that country broke its agreement. So breaking of the agreement is probably not the worst thing. Could somebody die? I suppose, if they do stupid things, but mostly it would probably be a good thing, not a bad thing. Secondly, really, what is the operative difference between what you're proposing here and modern day feudalism? I mean, that's what people are going to want to know. I mean, you're setting up a little kingdom here, and you're getting people to move in. You've got your little fancy contract or whatever, and people are in there, and then you're in charge, and they live in your kingdom. What's the difference?
Yeah, it's exactly the difference between having a contract and not having a contract. In a real feudal system, there's a king or a prince who decides whatever he wants, right? Not so in our system. We are a service provider. That means the idea is relatively easy. We only providing the security framework, which is security, a set of limited rules. For example, common law should apply as a civil law, and some independent court or independent arbitration, a dispute resolution, and that is what you pay for. And some infrastructure. That is what you pay for. For all the rest, you are on your own, and a spontaneous order can develop because we are only the security provider. So now if I say, well, I've changed my mind and I have all the police and all the guns, I'm going to change all the rules. Then you can say the same, I would say, to the country in our example. They could say, look, Titus, we have a contract, and in this contract it's clearly said that these things are unchangeable. Now you want to change that, I sue you. And this, you can go then to international arbitration again, right? An outside arbitrator, and that would be in the contract, and would say, okay, this guy has not fulfilled the contract, so I'm going to sue him. It's that easy. It's a really normal civil law relationship. And if I would do that I all the time would disregard my own contract, I would disregard the judgments of international arbitration, what would happen? Well, people would leave, no people would come, I would eventually become insolvent and go bankrupt. And that's exactly the incentive for me, as it is for the cruise ship captain, not to mistreat his clients, because they are his customers, and otherwise they will sue him and they will not come again to the cruise ship company, etc., etc. So I have other incentives than the king has, and in so far it's a completely different situation.
It's a wonderful explanation. Titus, thanks for taking time with me to talk about this. I know that this ran over what I told you, the 20 minutes or whatever, and basically double that. But I do love talking about this, and I think that this is the closest thing to what we're going to see as far as voluntarism in our lifetimes. If I can help in any way, shape, or form, please let me know. This is important to me. And for my listeners, free private cities. Titus, that's spelled like Titus. We would say it in English. And I Titus is just a fun name. Titus Gebel, spelled Gebel. And you can get it on Amazon. You can get it everywhere. And this is not some kind of dense academic read or anything like this. I'm very surprised that somebody who's, this must have been edited by somebody who speaks English as a primary language, right, Titus?
Yes, that has been the case. I have written it, but I'm not a native speaker, so I asked one of my friends who's a Native American and an English teacher in Germany, and he has gone over it and helped me so that it's now readable, easily readable also for you guys.
You two could make a living writing books. Oh, yeah, that's one more thing I needed to cover before I let you go. It's probably worth talking to people about your success in business, beforehand, right? Like, so you have already not failed. Businessmen fail all the time, but you failed few enough times to be successfully retired at, I'm guessing, 50. I'm just looking at you. I don't know. You could be younger than me for all I know.
Yeah, I retired at the end of 2014 as a CEO and founder of a German listed mining and oil and gas company. We were very successful, especially in Colorado with oil and gas. So I could retire and move to Monaco with my family. But I'm in my early 50s now. I'm 51 and have dedicated the rest of my life to make free private cities happen.
That's the kind of dedication that I'm looking for, and it's the kind of dedication I'd like to have for my life, too. Titus Gebel, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, and keep you updated what's going on, and then let us talk again.
Thank you. All right. It's another edition of the Edgington Post Show. I am Mark Edge, and interviewing Titus. Titus, can you help me with your last name? Gebel?
Gebel, yeah, like Clark Gable, can pronounce it the same way.
There you go. Titus Gebel, the author of Free Private Cities. Titus, you've probably been on my show more often than anybody else, and that's because I love talking to you, and I know that you're a man of action, and I find it very exciting. Your book, Free Private Cities, just came out. It's available on Amazon for anybody who wants to get it, and I am almost done with it at this point. I haven't quite gotten all the way through, but I'm reading it cover to cover. This isn't a skimming sort of situation. And I'm going to let people know right off the bat where I'm coming from on this book. There are a lot of libertarian books out there, lots and lots of them, and they come at things from all kinds of different points of view. This one, I think, is fantastic because the first part of it doesn't defend the notion of human liberty, which of course is very defensible. It instead attacks the notion of the state. And by the state, I mean an organization that claims the monopoly over governing on a given landmass. And then after that, posits a solution. So, Titus, I know you can't restate the entire book, but can you encapsulate your attack on the notion of the state?
Yeah, I mean, the many libertarians have already heard about these anti-statist things, and I'm basically coming from a different angle. I'm telling people, okay, what we are sold today, this social contract, is a contract to the disadvantage of third parties, which is absolutely forbidden in every civil law system in the world, right? So you and I, we cannot agree that, say, a third person has to pay something either to us or to another person, because this other person is not even involved in our contract. And that is exactly the problem we have even with Western democracies, that there is a group of people, be it elected or not, who is making the rules. And these rules we have not given our consensus to that. We don't even have given our consent that there is a group of people who should rule, right? And right. I put the point that even the biggest defender of, or supposedly defender of the social contract, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, even this guy, who's certainly somebody who is kind of problematic, but he's one of the big names, at least in Europe, when you talk about a social contract. And even this guy has recognized that for the very first social contract, you need 100% consent, right? And then they don't tell you. And that is exactly the problem which people do not recognize. And that is the problem why we are in such a dismay, why they are so divided. Because it's not possible that 51% of the people say to the other 49% how they have to live. And this is a problem. This is not, you cannot overcome this with the traditional state system that we have. So instead, what we need is a voluntary society. And I make a proposal how this can be established for the very first time in history as a niche product. And then hopefully the others will see, because I know that I cannot convince majorities, but by creating this, I will have a showcase, and then the others can see how much better this is going to work. But at least that's my thesis.
Yeah, I think you're correct that it seems obvious. It seems self-evident that a person cannot give rights to someone else that they don't themselves have. So I can give the right to my wife to write a check for me. I can give her access to my bank account, to my funds. I can turn over to a protection agency the right to protect my family, or in part, probably not in whole. I just don't think you could actually divorce yourself from that particular right in total, but you can certainly pay somebody to protect you. And as a society, one would presume that we could agree to set up an organization that would protect people against, violence. So if somebody commits a murder, we as a society can hire people who would then hunt that person down, bring them to justice, whatever we determine justice is. However, we as a society would not have the right to take somebody who has not first consented and throw them in jail for smoking marijuana or for keeping the money that they earned or any whole variety of things. You can't institute somebody. You can't opt somebody into your little program and call that freedom. That's not freedom.
Yeah. Exactly. Freedom needs voluntary action, right? That's the price of freedom, is voluntarism. If it's not voluntary, it's not freedom. And that is something you cannot talk away. There's only one freedom, Salman Rushdie said, and that's the freedom to reject. And there's a lot of truth to that. And on top of that general problem, we have a second problem. That is, even if you have given consent to a certain rule framework, like you pointed it out, what you have to do with people who are murdering others, then you have a problem that even if you have given your consent, then the ruling class is changing the rules every year, right?
Right.
So how is this possible? If let's assume I have given my consent to the social contract,
right,
and then suddenly the counterparty says, oh, by the way, we are changing the rules. And interestingly, what is happening in our current societies where everybody claims that we have a social contract is that it's constantly changed, but interestingly, only from one side. It's never us who are changing the social contract. It's always the other side. And that is something, if you put those two things together, then you begin to understand what's wrong here.
Right.
And that is where I came into play with my concept.
Right. And so let's nail down your concept here real quick. What's the idea behind free private cities?
Yeah, the idea is exactly that there is a social contract. So it's basically a service contract. So I'm not deviating from what all the big thinkers have found out in the past, that the only legitimate task a state or a government or an administration can have is the protection of life, liberty, and property. I agree with that finding. The problem is, as we have all experienced, that it starts with that and then it becomes something redistributional or whatever, a total immense number of laws which are limiting your freedom, and you have never given consent to that. You only gave consent to the protection of life, liberty, and property. So in my case, what I offer is protection of life, liberty, and property, but it's laid down in a contract. And the contract says, okay, this is what you have to pay for that. And there's no forum that can change the rules of the contract. So I cannot change unilaterally the contract, which is not something strange because it's in our civil. That's normal, right? You cannot just go to a baker and say, I take 2 of those breads, which you announced cost me $2 each. And he said, and by the way, I charge you 6. Because I give you something extra, which you did not order. And you say, no, sorry, I just ordered those 2 breads, and here's a price tag, $2 each, so I pay you 4. That's a contract. And the problem with our state is that they're basically giving you more, and you have to pay more, and you don't, things you didn't ask for. In my case, I would say, look, here's the contract. Before you come into my free private cities, you look in the contract if you like the rules that are laid out there. And there will be some areas where I reserve the right to make changes, like traffic rules or something that's changing over time. But in your basic rights, and especially what you have to pay for it, there would be an upper limit. It would say, okay, we will never charge you more than whatever, 5% or 10% of your income or a fixed amount. And then you can say, okay, that's a contract, and that's fine. And if you think that I'm not fulfilling the contract, you can immediately sue me. This is the interesting thing, because it's a relationship between a service provider, that is me, and between you as a customer. So there's no institution in between which only has the right to sue me or which has the exclusive right to interpret the contract.
Also, if the suing doesn't work out, you can also leave. You can just pick up and leave the free private city. Look, I want to talk to you about this a bit more. Hold on just one second, Titus. I want to talk to you about this a bit more, but if you want to listen to the